One thing you need to know about arrow functions is that they don't rebind this. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to start by defining a person object. Here we're going to have a simple talk method. Let's log this on the console. Okay, so we call person.talk. What do you expect to see on the console? A reference to the person object, right? Let's make sure everything's working. So back in the browser, so we have this, and next to that we have a reference to our person object, right? Now let's see what happens if we wrap this line inside of a call to the setTimeout function. So as you probably know, in JavaScript we have this global function setTimeout. We can give it a function and a timeout value, let's say 1000 milliseconds. So setTimeout will execute this function after this delay, 1 second, right? Now in this callback function, I want to log this on the console. So previously, when we logged this on the console, we saw the person object. Now let's see what happens when we log this inside of this callback function. So save the changes, back on the console, we get the window object, not the person object. What's going on here? The reason this happened is because here, this callback function is not part of any objects. So it's not like the talk method in the person object. It's a standalone function. And as I told you before, when we call a function as a standalone function outside of an object, by default, this returns the window object. Now in the previous example, instead of the window object, we got undefined because in that particular case, when we got a reference to a method in an object, the strict mode kicked in and returned undefined instead of the window object. But in this particular case, in case of callback functions, the strict mode does not override this behavior. So this returns a reference to the window object. So how can we solve this problem? In other words, how can we have a reference to the person object inside of this callback function? Well, here's one solution. So in the old days, we used to declare a variable, call it that or self, and set it to this. So we set this variable outside of this callback function. And now we can use self inside of this callback function to get access to the person object, right? So now let's log self on the console. So self and self. Save the changes, back in Chrome. You can see we have a reference to the person object. So this is the pattern that we used in the old days. Now with arrow functions, we no longer have to do this because arrow functions don't rebind this. In other words, if we change this callback function to an arrow function, it will inherit the this keyword. Let me show you. So I'm going to change this to an arrow function and revert this back to this, right? Save the changes, back in the console. You can see this returns a reference to the person object. In other words, here in this callback function, because we have used the arrow function syntax, this is not reset. Instead, it inherits this in the context in which this code is defined. So this is what I want you to take away. Arrow functions don't rebind the this keyword.